Hi, and welcome to Dark Window. I'm your host, Jim Mann. Here on this program, I will be talking with many of the leading investigators, researchers, and authors on the topics of UFOs, UAPs, alien abductions, extraterrestrials, and a host of many other fascinating and related topics. So please join me and my guest for the next hour as we reach out. This is Dark Window on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dark Window. I'm Jim Mann, your host. My guest today in the studio here with me is a friend of mine and someone you may have heard of, Paige. Now, Paige is Colorado MUFON's state director. She is a STAR investigator for MUFON and is the team lead administrator for MUFON's Mars team. She's the host of MUFON's What's Up radio broadcast on KGRADB.com, along with her co-hosts, Chris Deperno and Tara Diulus. And I don't know if I said that right. Katie has been on Coast to Coast with George Knapp. She's been on Spaced Out Radio and Coast to Coast with Coast to Coast Dark Becomes Light with Heidi Hollis and many more. Now, Katie has a book out there. It's called Love and Light, 4 decades of UFO encounters, experiences, and sightings shared with ufologist Dr. Leo Sprinkle, that maybe many of you have heard of or know. High strangeness on the Colorado Ranch, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. The Colorado Skinwalker Ranch. It's not really the Skinwalker Ranch. We don't want to get it confused with what's going on in the Uinta Basin, but it's another ranch that is just as weird, and the high strangeness is incredible. And so welcome, Katie. It's good to have you on the show. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Jim, so much for having me on.
So let's get started. I'm going to ask you a real loaded question here. Tell us a little bit about your background and how'd you get involved with UFOs and MUFON?
Right.
Where are we going with that?
Well, within my family, the topic of UFOs was sort of discussed from time to time, not heavily or anything. My grandfather actually had a sighting over Lake Como in Wisconsin in the early 1960s that was investigated by J. Allen Hynek. And then my family and I had a couple sightings of an oblong-shaped craft going back and forth from Wisconsin into Illinois when I was a kid. So I always knew about that, but it really wasn't until the mid 70s when I was a young girl. I'm giving away my age. But my mother started dating a gentleman from her work. She actually worked as a computer code writer for United Airlines, and she dated a gentleman who owned this ranch out in Elbert County, Colorado. And I visited the ranch a handful of times. My sister, my mother, and I, and we had some very unusual, frightening things happen on this ranch, and we were told never to talk about it. We didn't know anybody knew anything about it. But what's interesting about that is during this time, we lived about an hour from the ranch property, and I had like these tall shadow figures and paranormal things that were happening. So really for me, Jim, I got into the paranormal world before I got into ufology. I really, when the show Ghost Hunters came out, with Jason and Grant, I was like, #1 fan. I was so addicted to that and did a few ghost hunts, at the St. Augustine Lighthouse and the Stanley Hotel, and really dug deep into the paranormal world because I too experienced a lot of that as well. Matter of fact, the whole family did from birth on. And so it wasn't until 2012 that I was watching a documentary on TV on ufology. I started watching Ancient Aliens and all the shows on UFOs. And I was like, what was that on the ranch? What was happening on the ranch? So I joined MUFON, came in right as a field investigator in 2012. And just to explore for kind of personal selfish reasons what happened out there on the ranch. I never knew it was investigated or anybody knew anything about it. And I think it was in 2013, I purchased a book called Hunt for the Skinwalker. And this was before the Skinwalker Ranch really was well known or it had a television show or anything. I just knew that it was about a ranch in Utah and it had some high strangeness things associated with it. So I bought the book, and I started reading, and I got to a chapter titled Other Hotspots. And in that chapter, they talk about this ranch in Colorado. And of course, I knew the weird dynamics of the family. And in that book, it mentioned that there were 3 PhDs that had investigated that ranch property: Dr. Leo Sprinkle, Ph.D., Peter Van Arsdale, and John Durr. And so my state director at the time was Mr. Doug Wilson. And I asked Doug, hey, I need to get in touch with Dr. Leo Sprinkle. This has to be the ranch of my childhood. And Dr. Leo is old school. He didn't do computers or anything like that. So I wrote him a letter. He wrote me back, and basically confirming, yes, this was the ranch of your childhood. I knew the names of the people who owned the ranch and the actual location and so on and so forth. And now it's been almost 10 years of really diving deep into what was happening out on this ranch property.
Wow. Now, you had been out on that ranch numerous times.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. Yes.
You grew up in that environment kind of out there, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, both my sister and I experienced some things together when we were together and also separately. But the first shocker to me was knowing that anybody knew anything about it at all. And John Schuessler, who is one of the founders of MUFON, he learned of my connection to the ranch, and it wasn't long until he bestowed upon me the original briefing document from the original investigation.
Then now, how old is that? I'm sorry,
this was written in 1978.
Oh, wow.
And so,
okay.
So Dr. Leo Sprinkle, he lived, it was about a 2.5 hour drive from my home to his home there in Laramie, Wyoming. And so he has his whole body of work. So you have over 4 decades of Dr. Sprinkle's work. It is housed at the Heritage Center there in Laramie. Anybody can go there. Anybody can check out boxes upon boxes of his work. And in there are all the original documents from the ranch property. So you got to know, I was down there like a week later just digging through.
Wow.
And what happened there is, I pull these boxes, set it on the table, and I started pulling files, and I was reading letters that people had written to Dr. Sprinkle over decades. And he, with his brilliant wisdom, kept all his response letters because he used to type them and keep like the carbon copies of them. Right. So not only did I see, these witnesses, and we're talking, professional people in the field, Phil Klass, the debunkers, Linda Moulton Howe, all these researchers at the time, these names I knew and respected and looked up to. And I'm like, oh my gosh, here's all their stuff. And then, just people who were contactees who talked about dreams. Was this a dream or was this a memory? Just children would write to him, all sorts of people. And I got lost in these letters. So I spent 3.5 years back and forth to the archives, pulling boxes, taking pictures of people's letters. And then I'd get home and I would sort them and read them and put them into files of different categories. And hence came the book, Letters of Love and Light, 4 decades of research. Because I thought if I found these letters interesting, other people would as well. And, pulling out the kind of juicy part. So I organized them into different chapters. Some of them are like ET craft descriptions, dreams or memories. Dr. Sprinkle, he was a hypnotist. So, on hypnosis, his thoughts on that. And what I love about it the most is you kind of get to see Dr. Leo's train of thought through the decades, how he kind of progressed as a researcher and a hypnotist and a psychologist. Mm-hmm. So, that was a huge passion for me. And I'll tell you the one thing, Jim, that book did for me was it made me humble really, really fast, because as I'm an investigator and I'm researching the ranch in Colorado, I'm thinking I'm like onto these great new ideas, on frequency and vibration and magnetism and, all this stuff that to me was new, but I'm reading the letters like from the 60s going, womp, womp, womp. They knew about this all this time ago. And it's like we have to keep on reinventing the wheel, It's like, oh my gosh, we need a system. So new people coming into the field, and there's a lot of new young people coming into the field now, which is so great, that we don't want them to have to read 1,000 books, and go through all the pains that so many of us have had to do just to get to a certain point. Like I would love like just a huge database system where all like a super smart computer that can just take all this information and give us these answers, so yeah. But
let me, we're going to get back to this ranch in just a minute. MUFON. Colorado MUFON. You have been state director for how long?
It's a couple of years now. Yeah, I was
Couple of
assistant
years.
state director for numerous years before that. So it feels like a longer time, but
Does it?
yeah, it's been a couple of years.
Is it pretty busy for you? As
It's
the
very busy. We have our meetings the second Saturday of every month, and so we just this last Saturday had our meeting, and there was about 60 people there,
and do
and we
you have a
average about
guest?
6. Yeah,
A
we
guest
had
speaker?
we had Dr. Simeon Hine as our guest,
Oh,
and it's
wow.
always a
Okay.
wonderful time. And
Mhm.
we try to bring in a good 6 or 7 really great speakers per year. But it's we have just a wonderful group here, just like Phoenix does as well, and others across the country within MUFON, and they become your second family, and you
Oh,
just learn so
absolutely.
much from bringing people in. Of course, David Pilates, he brings in a big crowd every time, and
Did you have
it's just a
David?
fun way. We did have David,
Did you?
yes, yeah,
Wow.
yeah, a couple times actually, yeah. Now,
Great.
so because he's local for us, so that helps.
So
It's-
is Colorado sort of a hotspot for UFOs, or what would you say?
Yeah, I very much so. I mean, San Luis Valley, we still get a lot of reports out there in the Crestone area as well. Even in here close to my home, I'm up towards Woodland Park, so Colorado Springs is right down the hill, and that's very active. We get a lot of report sightings out of the Springs because, of course, we're surrounded by all the military bases. So I'm sure a
Right.
lot of these reports are probably our own. As a matter of fact, I just went and visited my sister last week, and she's in Parker, and she's like, I saw this just helicopter just slowly escorting something, just a light, just escorting this. It was almost like, a military hop. I don't know if it was escorting our own secret craft or what, but we get reports of those things often. And again, like a lot of the statistics show, 9 times out of 10, we can identify what people are reporting, but we are left with a good, that 10% margin of unknown
Right.
sightings. But right now, it's our slow time. Like right now, I think Colorado has only like 6 open cases right now. I
Really?
think we
Okay.
closed one today. Yeah. And in the spring and summer, when people are outside, those numbers go way up. So.
And so how many actual field investigators do you have working the field?
Yeah, we have 14 active field investigators in
That's a good
Colorado right
team.
now. Yeah, we have a really good team, and we have some new people coming in and training, and that's always fantastic to see as well. So
Now,
I think through the training we of course there's the boot camp in Phoenix, that's always great.
right.
Colorado does training, and we have once a month field investigator meetings, and we have my assistant state director Seth Feinstein, who does a fantastic job training our new FIs coming in. So, and then of course our chief field investigator is Jeremy Ray from Hangar One, and everybody
Yep.
loves working
Jeremy.
with Jeremy. Yeah, so
That's
yeah.
great.
Yeah,
Well,
it's awesome.
I'm glad the chapter is moving along well, and you guys are
Yeah.
successful. And now we're going to get back to this ranch a little bit. I wanted to know how things were going for you in MUFON. It sounds like it's moving right along. One last question: are you seeing an increase in membership, or is it kind of at a level? Or what do you think?
I think through the years, our increase, the membership is slowly increasing. I think it's kind of did this wave here, of course,
Mhm.
with the recent news, and now it's like kind of leveling off a little bit, but certainly the interest is there.
Well, good. Well,
Yeah.
that's good to hear. So now back to this ranch.
Yeah. Back to the ranch.
Back to Colorado's Skinwalker Ranch. Although we know it's not the Skinwalker Ranch, but do they have a name for this place?
Well, as I learned in my research, it was investigated by APRO,
Yeah.
and the sheriff and the townspeople, since it's such a rural little town, they did not want the stigma or the publicity of the town, so they decided to change the names of the people that own the ranch as well as the location. And in UFO folklore, it was known as the Clearview Ranch or the
Okay.
Rocky Mountain Ranch. And I think I sent you some newspaper articles that show the headlines of
Yes.
the Clearview Ranch.
You did. You sent us a bunch of articles.
Yep. Oh, this is kind of the similar. There it is. Okay, we can go over that next one. But here we go. Clearview is close encounter capital of the U.S. Does one town have UFO monopoly? Town has unusual amount of UFOs. These were all pretty much written in 1978. So the height of the activity, and what I mean by the height of the activity, things were like out of control, almost mutilations happening almost on a daily basis from 1975 to 1978. I mean, it was just like, if you put it on a graph, it was like, whoa, crazy things going on, and then it tapers down. Now, a lot of my number one question is, are things still happening there today? The answer is yes, it is, but not to the degree of that time. So as an investigator, like, why that time? What was happening there? Why the military presence out there? And one of the questions as an investigator and somebody who just wants answers, because really that's what motivates me in all of this. I just want the truth. I want to know what was happening out there. And so there was no question about it, a heavy military presence out there. And so it was always sort of like, is this the chicken or the egg, right? Was there UFOs and unknown paranormal activity, and then the military came in to investigate it, or was that reversed? Chicken or egg. How much of it was caused by the military? How much of it is unknown UFO paranormal experiences? So, fortunate for me, I had somebody who has just been a fabulous, wonderful friend to me and has helped fund some of my research. And I've been able to fly out and do interviews in Florida and drive out and do interviews in Wyoming with the sheriff at the time. There was two. The sheriff of Elbert County was a person named George Yarnell, and then the undersheriff was Bill Waugh. And Bill Waugh has since passed, as well as George Yarnell. But I got to fly out to Florida and interview his widow, Jean, and his son, Keith, and spent the day with them. And she was wonderful because she pulls out this big binder. It was like this thick. And she's like, look, I saved these all these years, and it was all the newspaper articles from back in the day. And I was just like, holy cow. And why that's such a treasure trove for me is, you go through and you pull all the names of these people that are mentioned in the article. And there was over 250 names. And what I also learned from that is that this phenomenon wasn't just located on the ranch property, on the 60 acres. It was the whole entire town of Kiowa, Colorado, Elizabeth, Franktown, Simla, Rama, Calhan. It's this whole stretch in Elbert County that was affected by these mutilations and this high strangeness. So that makes you wonder what in the world's going on there and what is causing that to happen,
Now you sent me, I don't know, you sent me 7 or 8, maybe a dozen little pictures and clippings and things that you've documented over the years. Patricia, could you pop up some of that? Maybe give us a little bit, because I want to know what exactly happened out there. What are we talking about? What sort of,
you and me both? Yeah. So these are so one of the very first things that was reported when the family bought the ranch property were these bangs and sounds from underneath the ground, and also these humming sounds. Sometimes these humming sounds, which is something that I witnessed as well, would get so loud that you couldn't hear yourself speak over it. So there's these strange humming sounds. Then, of course, there's the cattle mutilations, which weren't just cow, but horse, sheep, and even dog were reported being mutilated out there. This, of course, was all across, like from Montana to Wyoming, down to Texas, a few in Arizona, Kansas, Nebraska, that whole midsection of the United States was experiencing these mutilations. And Bill Waugh, the undersheriff, Gene was telling me that, and Keith, he had a map in the station, and they would put pins in where these mutilations were happening, sometimes same day within a few hours of each other, one in Montana, one in Colorado. And so they were really trying to figure that out. And back in the day, they suspected maybe these were like satanic or cult activity, right? And I at least gotten to the point where there's no way this was cult activity. Now, Chuck Zukowski and Christopher O'Brien did extensive research on these mutilations back in the time. And as a matter of fact, Linda Moulton Howe, she was an investigative journalist back in the mid 70s there in Colorado. She lived not too far from where I lived off of Arapahoe Road. And so, that's where she did her film, A Strange Harvest. And Bill Waugh, the undersheriff, was actually in her film, as well as George Yarnell. So, she was really, I think she kind of got her start in the mutilation phenomenon back in Colorado at the time. And I think recently, people have come out and said, well, no, we know now that 100% of these mutilations, it was all the military. It was all that. And I maybe half, maybe 70%, but certainly not all of them were. There were just too many high strangeness incidents of these mutilations that just, there's no way it could have been done by our own military.
Do we
I
have a
just don't
picture
believe
of
that.
one of those
We do.
mutilations?
This story, I went out. The photo on the right is what it looks like when a coyote jumps on the back of a calf and just tears at it. Sorry for the graphic nature of the photos, but the one on the left was an interesting story. This was a witness, Sheila. Her family pioneered this small town. So, and her family ranchers through and through. And she was telling me that right out of high school, so this would have been 1978, 1979, they bought several acres out in Rama, Colorado, which is really close to Kiowa and in Elbert County. And her husband was out on horseback checking the cows for calves. He comes across a dead calf, and there were 4 incisions in a perfect square cut. And the top of the fur was removed, but the skin was still there. So he jumps on the horse and goes against my witness. They come back in the pickup truck. She said it took them about 20-25 minutes to get back to that calf. When they got back, that calf had been mutilated, cauterized. That's what the picture is. She wrote me on Facebook and goes,
Right.
"You're not going to believe it. I found the picture." And it was cauterized. Blood was drained out of there. The organ was removed. And interestingly enough, so the ground was, it was kind of moist, as you can see in the pictures. There were no footprints. There were no truck prints. They never heard a helicopter. And she said this was miles off the county road. She said it's not like somebody just could have pulled over on the side of the road and did this. It's in the middle of their property. Again, no track marks, no nothing. And she said the overwhelming sensation they had was a sense of being watched, which freaks me out because that's what I remember most about when I was a young girl, that sense of being watched all the time. It was intense. It was an intense feeling. And to my knowledge, that is still going on today, that sense of always being watched or monitored. So I find that really interesting.
Now, the local authorities were aware that this stuff is happening, correct?
Right. Yeah. And I didn't know that at the time. It wasn't until I went to Dr. Sprinkles and pulled these files and there were all these notes. So I do believe that I sent you the image of all the military bases that are in the springs there.
Elbert Ranch.
Yeah, there we go.
Is that
So,
it there?
yeah. So the big red star there is where the ranch is located. And you can see on this map that you have the Air Force Academy, you have the Cheyenne Mountain NORAD, Fort Carson, Scrivener Air Force Base, Peterson Air Force Base, and there's also Butte, which has the helicopters there over by Fort Carson, I believe. So back in the day, in the late 70s, the Air Force Academy owned property across I-25 up into that area where the ranch was. In Dr. Sprinkle's files, there was an interesting note about it was said Warren, and then it was redacted out, from Fort Carson was on the ranch property. It's the next one. We'll go to this one next. This is the undershare. Here we go. Warren blank. It was redacted out. These are actual Dr. Leo Sprinkle's handwriting up here. From Camp Carson, visits the ranch, felt something wrong, wouldn't go into woods. So behind the ranch house, there were these wooded areas of ponderosa pines. Said something took over his mind, made him walk towards the woods, would release him, and he would run back. And this did this to him 5 times. Now that made me think of, DARPA mind control kind of things. What the heck was that? And why was somebody from Fort Carson even on the ranch property? I mean, that was stunning to me. And then that one you showed first, this was Bill Waugh talking. And this was, again, Dr. Leo Sprinkle's notes. He said, Bill Waugh, the undersheriff, wants to talk to someone, has seen ships going into the ground, boxes, mutilations being done. Nobody will talk, doesn't want investigation or publicity, no stigma. His credentials were important to him. It was an important factor. John would go back. Now, John was one of the adults on the ranch property from my childhood who has since passed away. It said, NORAD colonel said bluntly to forget about it and to shut up. Air Force head has a directive to handle UFOs and Bigfoot. Now, this is interesting, the whole Bigfoot side of this thing.
Bigfoot.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Because if anybody goes to Google Earth and searches Elbert County or Kiowa, Colorado, you have very flat, open ranch areas, and then you have these little patches of treed woods. It's not like a Bigfoot family could live there all the time and hide. And in our experience on the ranch, it's like Stan Gordon in his book. It is as if those Bigfoot were either workers or bodyguards, but they were directly connected to the craft that were seen out there. I don't know if they were interdimensional beings or what. We also had these large crypto birds sighted there. They look like a phoenix. And they were reported seen out there on the ranch. And it was reported that they actually got castings of these Bigfoot creatures and hair samples that were sent in and tested. I don't know what happened to those things. They're gone. I don't know where they are, but it was reported. And not only were they so on the ranch property, these Bigfoot creatures that had these like glowing kind of piercing eyes would like stand by the barns and the silos and like look at the house. They were menacing. There were also these strange boxes that were seen there. I witnessed one in the daytime. They would emit the sound or this tone. And in this report, it stated that the ETs that were spotted there were two types. We'll get to that in a while. Said that those boxes were lethal, and they made an example of one of the Bigfoot creatures. They had to walk toward it, and it dropped the Bigfoot creature. So, and that's what's reported. I did not witness this, but that's what was reported in the report. And I'm like, whoa, what is that all about? And interestingly enough, when I was speaking in Laughlin, Bob Solis watched my presentation and he sent me a really nice email. And in it, I don't know if I sent that one to you, but he had two drawings. One of the original sketches from the mid-70s. Yeah. So the drawing on the right there, the darker one, that was the original sketch of the Sasquatch Bigfoot creature seen on the ranch property. The one on the right was the one in Montana. And basically he says, I will confirm to you that in 1996, I was in contact with the widow of, and I redacted it out, Sands was a deputy sheriff for Cascade County, Montana, near Great Falls in the 70s. In one letter, she states that he also served on a special team secretly funded by the Department of Agriculture, which is also very interesting to me because when I talked to Richard Doty in Laughlin, he said, if you need to FOIA the Department of Agriculture. So that's a lead that I need to follow. But anyway, he said the purpose of which was to determine the cause of many cattle mutilations, UFO sightings, and Bigfoot reports. He was asked many times to take polygraph tests of airmen stationed at Maelstrom who had seen UFOs. And in one letter, she states, I am an artist. And in 1977, so the same year, we were called to the sheriff office to draw a picture of a Bigfoot from an eyewitness who passed the polygraph. This is confirmation to your story. And then he also recommended the book Mystery Stalks the Prairie by Keith Wolverton. But so those to me, the nose, the mouth, the eyes, the round eyes, the sparse hair, they're like an identical match in my opinion. And what's interesting too, when I was a little girl and I knew, the adults in the situation for both my sister and I were like, don't talk about this. We don't want anybody to know about this. But they would refer to, yet we would hear them talking about police being called and more mutilations on the ranch and on all these crazy things happening. So we knew, and we witnessed crazy things. So we knew it was bigger than what we could even imagine. But they called those the white fuzzies. They called them white fuzzies. And because they had like lighter, like gray hair. They weren't like dark haired Sasquatch, and they were kind of not super thick. They were different looking than your average stereotypical Bigfoot creature. And that's what they called them, white fuzzies, when I was a kid. So my whole life, I'm like, yeah, what about the white fuzzies? And my sister and I were talking about that. And at the time, and I don't know if people will remember it, but like from 75 to like the early, like 79, there was a really popular children's book called TA's for Tots. And they talked about warm fuzzies and cold pricklies in those books. It was really popular. And I'm wondering if that's why my mom tried to make them less scary sounding. Oh, they're just white fuzzies, So that's how I remembered being referred to them. Yeah.
So speaking of your mom, so you spent some time on this ranch personally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As what, a teenager or a preteen?
No, I was 9 to 12 years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
What stands out in your mind that you actually witnessed while you were there? Is there anything?
The scariest night that we were there, it was my sister, my mom, and I believe it was the boys' mother's birthday. So the situation was strange. The two parents, the people who own the ranch, had 3 sons. The two youngest sons lived with us at our house during the week to attend a bigger school district. The oldest son stayed on the ranch full time. My mom was dating their dad, and their mother was dating another gentleman, John. Okay. So they were in the process of this was the 70s. Come on, they were getting free love. No, it wasn't like that. Yeah. Anyway, so that was the situation, that's my mom's boyfriend's ranch property.
Yeah.
And anyway, so we would bring the boys back and forth to the ranch on the weekends. And that particular weekend, I believe it was the boys' mother's birthday. So it wasn't uncomfortable because I have pictures of all of us together for Thanksgiving, right? All of us. So it was kind of this thing. But anyway, we were there. The adults I remember were in the front room, like playing board games is what I remember. It was super like late at night or early in the morning. And the three boys, my sister and I was the youngest of all the kids, were hanging out in the boys' bedroom when all of a sudden that humming noise we talked about started up. So it was like, and while that's happening, all the power in the house goes out. And I just remember seeing out of the boys' bedrooms, the brightest light is like brighter than the sun. The brightest light you ever saw was coming through that window. We were all freaking out, right? And while all this is going on and we're all terrified out of our gourd, this disembodied, it sounded like an electronic sounding voice, gave this warning. And what's really interesting, my sister and I remember it so well. We were so terrified. But in this briefing document, from that time was the exact words that came out of that thing.
Really?
And it was, and it says, attention, we have allowed you to remain. We have interfered with your lives very little. Do not cause us to take action, which you will regret. Your friends will be instructed to remain silent concerning us. That's where the threat and the warning came from, was that disembodied electronic voice. And I just remember getting in the car, driving the hour back to the house. And when the house that we lived in full time, you walk in the front door, there were stairs that went straight up from the door and 2 rooms. I got into the door and I collapsed and I was paralyzed for a good solid 5 minutes. My mom and my older sister were like, Katie, what's wrong with you? What did you eat? What did you eat? And I couldn't even speak. I was trying to say peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I couldn't speak. I remember this so vividly. They get me upstairs into my bedroom and I had my first full-blown migraine headache. And I suffered those like weekly after that event. I don't know, what I never correlated the two. And interestingly, it wasn't until really Skinwalkers at the Pentagon came out that I combined what was happening at my house and what was happening at the ranch. I always decompartmentalized like the tall shadow figures and the orbs and, all these physical things. I disconnected them from what happened on the ranch, and it wasn't until I learned that this was happening elsewhere that I was like, oh, holy crap, maybe they are connected. Maybe they were connected.
Now, was any real empirical data, has anything ever been found on the ranch that would maybe lead us to think
I mean, one of the other things, my sister and I, it was a spring day, we're flipping the Frisbee, but we had that wet, heavy snow that you get in the spring in Colorado. And we looked down at our feet and we noticed this large circle underneath of us that was dry. And nothing grew in that circle. And I just remember my sister and I both going, wow, this is really weird. And then continued to play Frisbee. Didn't think much of it other than that. And of course, in this document, there was 2 of those on the ranch property. And they actually measured it. And they, in the description, in one of the letters from the files, it says there were drops of blood outside of the circle. And in my investigator mind, I'm like, well, maybe there was a missile silo or something that was there, right? So I started investigating silos and all that. Now, that wasn't the case on the ranch property. In fact, the silo that sits on that property is still there. But I did find out that the Titan missile silos were really close to Kiowa. I believe they're in Elizabeth, closer to Elizabeth, but they're inactive. So part of, I always wondered, like, were they digging tunnels under there? Because I don't know what these strange bangs were underground, I don't know. There's just so many different phenomenon. That ranch property sat vacant for almost 10 years. And there were reports of orbs flying on and off the property. There's also a nearby ranch, and people can go on YouTube and look up is called the Buffalo Ranch, and that's really close to Kiowa as well. That's Jeffrey Saylor's the Buffalo Ranch, and he talks about his buffalo being mutilated and strange things with triangles and paranormal things. And so you had all this activity, the paranormal stuff, the mutilations, these orbs flying off, UFO sightings, circles on the ground, strange helicopters that were, even the sheriff, even Bill Wall and them, they would have these what seemed like silent balls of light coming on and off their properties, and then helicopters after that. And they were, the interesting thing about these helicopters too, and there's newspaper articles about it, that's how I found out about it, but they would menace people, like chase young kids in fields. Why are they doing this? And I asked Richard Doty that actually when I saw him, like, why would these unmarked helicopters be menacing people? You know, there's articles written about it. What's going on here? And he said, as a distraction. If you're looking over here, you're not looking over there. A distraction for what? What are they doing out there? You know, I want to know what the military was doing out there.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm looking at some of these newspaper clippings and some of these pictures that you sent us. Patricia, there's one there about A7D crash. What is that about?
Oh boy. Yeah. So in again,
speaking of the military.
Yeah. So I have this here in my hands. This in the reports, they said that, and you can read it up here. This was in the briefing document. Said, I also understand that 2 National Guard interceptors were up, redacted out, and went down while in pursuit of a UFO at night. And I thought, okay, if 2 interceptors crashed, there has to be something about it. So I started researching it, and there's the article about it. 2 Air Guard pilots safe after air crash. So I did a FOIA request to Kirkland Air Force Base, Mishap's office, and I got this big, thick report back on this
Kirkland
crash.
sent that to you?
Yes. Kirkland.
Okay.
Yep, here it is. And I found it interesting. First of all, what I've learned about it is they were scrambled out of Buckley Air Force Base, which is now Space Force. And it was in the evening, and supposedly this was an instructor and a student on a training, thing at night. But what I find suspicious, and I've talked to people in the Air Force about it, and they think it's suspicious as well, is they had 255 live rounds of ammunition on board over like people's houses.
So they had live ordnance on
board.
Top.
And so I have the transcripts from, look at this. You can see how much is, hold on, get to some redacted stuff. Look at that one that's redacted out. This might be the transcript. Yeah, this might be the transcript of the radio towers. But
is there at least fascinating a date or something on that, Katie?
There's dates, the location, what they've, how much they were worth, all sorts of really cool information. I would really love somebody from the Air Force to help me go over all this. But what I found interesting is one of the causes that it states, and I don't know if you have that image, but it says that one of the causes of the crash is that the instructor, right here, the instructor pilot misidentified the rotating beacon of another aircraft as the student's aircraft cause. And it was one of several causes. But nowhere in that big, thick pile of data does it identify what the other aircraft was. It never says that it was a Cessna or the towers identified it. That's the only time in that big, thick stack it was ever mentioned. And then the other causes were like the student turned off its lights when he thought he turned it on. So the instructor hit the tail of the student and both went down. Both pilots ejected. Both pilots survived. I wish I knew if they were still around or alive or what. Even if they were, I'm sure if they were chasing an unidentified craft, they weren't. They're not going to be able to talk to me, although that new law just passed where they would be protected if they did. But interesting, it was that David Marler's doing some research on the property, and I don't know, maybe a month or and a half ago now, and I came across a really cool article talking about a Canadian NORAD station that actually scrambled a couple jets after an unidentified craft they had on radar. So we know that they have done it in the past, and why wouldn't they do it in this case? And in fact, Bill Wall talks about so the Stapleton Airport, and I believe NORAD, or I'm not sure who issues no-fly zones, but they did for a time issue a no-fly zone over Kiowa, Colorado, where all these mutilations were occurring. They had the police up in airplanes all the time. They had a $10,000 reward for to catch these mutilators. And people, talking to Bill and other people that lived in the town at the time, you would have loaded shotguns sitting by your door. Like, people were actively looking to catch these perpetrators of these mutilations. People were on edge. It was like really eerie. People were scared. People were afraid they were going to mutilate people next. I mean, this was a very scary time, and nobody ever caught anybody doing anything, So that's really mysterious.
Yeah, it is. I see a number of things on here, the list of these little articles and pictures you sent me. Wow, there's a lot going on there. Has there been any sort of conclusion as to what any of this stuff is?
Well, I go back and forth. Right now, where I sit, for a while, I was like 75% of it's the military, 25% unknown. That has, the more I interview, the more I learn, the more I discover that ebbs and flows a little bit. Now I'm like 50-50. I'm like, because we know for certain the military was out there. There's actually a really good publication. If anybody can find it, I have a copy of it. If you're really interested, maybe they could contact the show. I could get it to you. But it's a research document that is titled "The Choppers and the Choppers," and they do statistical analysis and data on the mutilations and these strange helicopters, right, all across the Midwest. And it's really fascinating to read it. So we definitely know that the military, Air Force, was aware of what was going on out there, and the police and NORAD. But we also know that the level of high strangeness and unexplained things that, to me, can't be, like, people will say, well, yeah, the people can dress up in Sasquatch suits. People can do these disembodied electrical voices. They can do, was it all the military just scaring the tar out of people? And why would they do that? I mean, if they just wanted to buy the property, they could have just offered them a lot of money and bought the property if they were trying to chase them off, I mean, so right now I'm like 50-50. I think both things were going on. And then I'm like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? And I really believe that the high strangeness stuff started and the military came in to go, what the heck's going on? Maybe they were picking things up on radar. I don't know. But I think that's where I am now. But again, that changes as I learn more,
I see you've got something here that says that shows a couple of ETs or something. 1970 ETs.
Right. To me, this was just mind blowing to me. So the image there on the right with the tubes coming out, and it looks like it has this helmet and this box. This was in Dr. Leo Sprinkle's files from the ranch, from the Kiowa Ranch. And the one on the right, or the one on the left, was actually a guest speaker we had. His name's Sean Bartok, and he wrote a book called Flashbacks. And those tubes in the neck, he said, expanded out. Now, what's interesting about this, I didn't know anything about Sean Bartok's story, where his property was, what the years were. And come to find out, after I got to know him later, obviously, is his property was 14 miles from the ranch property. Okay. Almost identical types of activity. Now, in the book, it's in Castle Rock, as he's a little closer in. I'm not going to give the name of the town he was in, but it was literally 14 miles from our ranch property. And when he pulled up those drawings of that ET being, because I had already had the drawings from Dr. Leo Sprinkle, and I thought, these are so unusual looking. I've never seen anything like these, like in, magazines or movies or articles. I didn't share them with anybody. There's another image of them, because these guys had like this box thing, and then these like, here, that's the original drawing.
That's incredible.
From the ranch, like these spindly spider-like arms. And actually the description, that box panel, I don't know if it was a protective something, but it actually came out to a point. And the one on the right is Sean Bartok's with the tubes coming out. And and the reason I have AI there is because I was at the grocery store standing in line, and there was a magazine called Popular Mechanics, and the front cover was all on AI, and you see how they have those tubey things in the neck, and I was like, oh my gosh, maybe those were AI, and maybe they were connected to those strange mechanical sounding boxes out there. Because what was reported in these documents, and I never witnessed ET out there, I witnessed shadow figures in my room, but not ET. And but what the report said was that there were two types of ETs spotted out on the ranch property, and they were in conflict with one another. One of them were these AI crazy looking dudes, And then the other ones were like Nordics.
Right.
And they were like, we're doing our thing here. You guys are, don't mess with us. We won't mess with you. And so, yeah, isn't that
Well,
crazy?
that's all. Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Let's go back to your book. Now, what can you tell because we're coming down to the last 5 minutes.
Oh, man.
What can you tell us about your book?
Well, I could tell you that I just find it fascinating because the way it's organized, you can just go through the decades and just see cases that really weren't well known. There's some really great information about Francis E. Warren Air Force Base that I found interesting. Mass sightings over that, because I do believe a lot of the UFO activity around military bases and missiles and nukes and all that. I think there's a lot of truth in that. There's a really cool case from the 1930s from a pastor in Snowflake, Arizona, that is almost identical to Travis Walton. And again, Travis Walton was 1975. So for me as a UFO investigator and researcher, if anybody brings up the 70s, I'm all about it, because to me, that's my favorite decade to research. I mean, it's before internet and cell phones and all this stuff. And I think it's an overlooked decade. I think there was a lot of interesting activity going on in the 70s. And in the Mars program, which you mentioned before, the MUFON Research Redacting Archive team is it's all that pre-CMS, pre-computerized cases. And I found another interesting ranch in Ohio, Pyle, Pennsylvania. And of course, there's Marley Woods, and there's Trey Hudson's Southern, and of course, Skinwalker and Bradshaw and Blind Frog. And there's these locations all across that have these things in common. And I think they're all important. I think they all need to be looked at as a whole and not just, one at a time, because they have something in common. Personally, I think it's, water, which David Paulides talks about. A lot of these disappearances around water. And in fact, he's close to Wyoming and Colorado for some of these missing people, but also electromagnetism being highly magnetic areas.
So what is on your schedule now coming up in the next month? Do you have conferences that you were speaking at, or so what's going on?
Well, yeah. Dave Scott from Spaced Out Radio is having a cool fan party in May, the weekend of May 20th. So I'll be out there in Vegas for that. That's fun. I'll be out in Roswell at the UFO Expo out there in Roswell in March. I'm not going to be speaking there, but I'll be hanging out with the KGRA group, and that should be a lot of fun, conducting interviews. And, for me, speaking is nice just because it gets all this information. You work so hard, you want to share it with others. But it's also great just to attend, because you get to meet people and hear stories. And every time you go, you meet somebody else that has some other key piece of information. And to me, that's what it's all about,
Yeah, it's this entire field of research is amazingly interesting. Yeah. And you can have a lot of fun doing it.
Right.
And we all do. And we've been doing it for a long time. And at the same time, we're what do I want to say? It's fascinating and fun. I guess that's where I'm going with this comment.
Yeah.
And the number of people that are out there doing this kind of research, writing books, publishing papers, and doing all of this is numerous. That's what our whole show is about, is like shedding light on all this. Right. So is there anything else you'd like to tell us while you're here? We're out of time pretty much, but is there anything we missed here? Now, I do see one small article about metal found.
Oh, yeah.
Do we have time to talk about that?
Yeah. It's just really short. It was just in that big pile of newspaper articles. And I just thought it was interesting because south of Rama, again, really close where my witnesses are and really close to the ranch, mysterious blanket of metal found in field. And you read this article and there's a photograph of it. It looks very unusual. It was taken off to a lab, disappeared. So it was just another one of those things with more names and more people. And I guess what I'd really like to say, I mean, if the chances of anybody from this area that knows anything, that was in the military, was in the Air Force, if you know anything about this, please, reach out to me and contact me. And you can do so by going to katiepage.net, and you can contact me off my website.
That was going to be my next question. Is there websites, Facebook, places people can go?
You can find me on Facebook, and you can find me again at katiepage.net. I have a website there, and you can contact me through there. And I have an appearances page, so you can see what I'm up to. And I have, my research I try to share there and everything. So you can find me there. And I'm working on that second book. I'm hoping to get it done by the end of this year.
And you're doing all this, plus you're doing all the duties of the state director of MUFON for Colorado.
Yes. Plus working on top of that.
Yeah. Plus working a full-time job.
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow. Okay. Well, Katie, it's been a fascinating conversation. You are certainly plugged in on this stuff, and I'm just going to stick with it and see what we find out, because I mean, we got the Skinwalker Ranch, we got the Buffalo Ranch, we got Clearview Ranch. I mean, these things all seem to be basically in the same area of the country. I mean, across,
it's interesting. Yeah.
It's almost like there's a parallel line that you can follow from Utah across Colorado. Yeah. And I do know we're talking about water. There's huge aquifers underground.
There are
in those areas.
Yeah.
That might be a lead. I don't know, but
I think
interesting stuff.
I think we're on to something there.
I think we are. Okay.
I think David's going to crack it. Somebody. I mean, that's just it. All of us working together. It's all going to, I have hope that we're going to have some answers. I really do.
People want to know sometimes, well, what does all this stuff mean? That are we in danger? Is something going to harm us? In all my years, I'm going to say I've not seen anything that's yet to harm us, but the unknown is scary.
Right. And what I would like to add to that is just protect yourself.
Yeah.
Surround yourself with white light and positivity and good thoughts, and don't let anything bad, because at the time on the ranch, some of it did seem pretty scary, but it could have just been because I was a little girl and it was all terrifying. But now as an adult, I try to ground myself and protect. So always protect yourself and be positive. So.
Well, that's a good place to stop. So, Katie, thank you very much for coming on my show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll have you back if you're willing to come back after you write your next book.
Yeah, absolutely. Great, I'm here.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, on behalf of Katie Paige, Director of MUFON, State Director of MUFON, Colorado, my program manager behind the scenes, Patricia, the girl who's been popping all the programs up, or all the pictures up. She's a very integral part of this program, and myself, Jim Mann. Thank you for joining us, and see you next week. My guest next week will be film documentary producer James Fox. Very interesting conversation coming up there. So thank you very much. Have a good evening, and next week.